Awesome. Well, we are live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Career Chronicles podcast. We're so excited to have you join us. I'm Sloan Bartley. I am your host for Career Chronicles, and I also work for one of our sponsors that I'm going to quickly introduce. Spyglass Partners is a staffing agency that works on project-based and full-time hires within IT, supply chain, and finance and accounting, and they are kind enough to support and encourage this conversation around recruiting and retaining women in the workplace. We are also sponsored by Merit Media that supports our back end of getting us up and running on Spotify and Apple Music. So check out our podcast there if you are more of an audio person. But we are excited to have those of you who are joining us on LinkedIn and YouTube. And please introduce yourselves in the chat. Say hi to Amy and I. We want this to be interactive. And I am so excited to be joined by Amy Czuchlewski. Amy, thank you for being here. I'm so excited for our conversation around the importance of female friendship at work. I think this is going to be a really fun conversation. I want to read your formal bio and introduce you to everyone before we officially kick off. But Amy is the Senior Director of Mobile Engineering at Foot Locker and former Head of Technology at Noggin, which is also known as Nickelodeon. Former Head of Technology at Bottle Rocket and Blue Label Labs as well. Her 20 plus years of experience building consumer facing applications started with the very first phone to have downloadable apps, which was the Motorola i1000 Plus. Is that how you say it?
That's
in
right.
1999. That is very cool. So you have been with the mobile apps from the beginning of their existence, which is pretty cool. You've led engineering teams from 20 to 150 people, spearheaded mobile and web applications for 100 plus companies from Fortune 500 to startups. Beyond the corporate world, Amy sits on the board of directors at Bold Idea, which connects tech companies with schools to provide hands-on computer programming mentors for students. She works with her daughter as founding members of the Turtle Project, which raises awareness about sea turtle conservation. I love that. And Amy has been honored for her work with the CTO of the Year Award from DCEO in 2016, the Women in Technology Luminary Award from Technology Ball in 2020, and she was a finalist for the Corporate CTO Award from Tech Titans in 2020. Amy holds a computer engineering degree from the University of Michigan. Her tech journey was sparked by her father, who rose to senior systems analyst at Kellogg's, defying the odds with no college degree in the 1950s. Amy is a sought-after speaker on stages and podcasts like this one, where she shares her tech journey and her mission to empower the next generation of women in technology, which is exactly why we're here, is to foster space for women to share their experiences and hopefully for organizations to learn how to better support and recruit women and make their organizations a place where we feel more welcome, especially in tech. So thank you so much, Amy, for being here.
Thank you so much, Sloan. That was a wonderful intro. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I think you wrote it, so kudos to you. you did a great job writing your bio. Yeah. So do you even remember how we got connected? That's how I kick off most podcasts. And now I'm like, we've spoken so many times. I'm like, wait a minute, I just know Amy. I don't remember how we actually got introduced to one another. I think somebody connected us. Do you remember who our mutual connection is?
Yeah, it was another person from Spyglass, just somebody I knew and said, "Oh, you need to meet Sloan." And so,
Okay. Was it Luke? Was it Luke Gendron?
It might have been. I know. I also know Luke, but I feel like it was somebody else.
It might have been Luke, might have been Joseph. It was probably one of my colleagues. That makes a lot of sense. Well, we had an amazing conversation, talking about, career advancement for women. And that's kind of where our conversation got started, is what this looks like. And I know we talked about how women are getting promoted at a slower rate than men across all industries, but you have personal experience in tech and, kind of know, we all know that tech can be, a bit of a challenge for women. And, this has been talked about in a lot of avenues, but, it's not shocking that there are so few women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies if we're getting promoted at a slower rate. So I know you have this theory that we can address this issue at the individual level. Talk us through what that theory is and, how that's been true for yourself as you've risen in the ranks of leadership.
Well, it's more than a theory. It is something, if we can all band together and support each other, it is going to happen. But just first going back to what you said, McKinsey's done studies showing where there's kind of a breakdown in women's promotion, right? And so women are promoted at a lower rate than men, but that happens starting from the first promotion to manager, and then again to director and VP and to CEO. And what that means is because that rate is slower, there's fewer and fewer women in each of those levels until by the time you get to CEO. I think there's 1 in 4 female CEOs and only 1 in 16 are actually women of color. So that's horrible and yet not surprising when you look at the numbers.
Right.
But so what we can do is we need to figure out how to get that very first promotion in place for women. How do we support as many women as possible to get that very first promotion to manager? Because then there's a much bigger pool for women to get promoted to director, and on and on and on. So creating the female friendships at work is something that at least I've really experienced throughout my career. Having people that you can talk to, rely on, and that advocate for you, whether they're men or women, actually doesn't matter.
Right.
But having those people who have your back and will support you, whether you're in the room or not in the room, is absolutely critical for you to be able to get promoted, as well as you get to help other women get promoted too. So yeah, I think I've seen this work at several different companies. So in one in particular, I was part of the executive leadership team. And we really found that the women, there were 3 of us or 4 of us, I think, in the leadership team, and we felt like we weren't being heard. We felt like, we had several kind of off meetings after our leadership talks, and like it just felt like our ideas weren't really being heard by the entire team. We felt like we were talked over. We felt like people are just repeating what we would say, and then they would get credit for it. And so we started within those meetings just backing each other up. So when
how many women was it on the team? Like, what was the ratio?
Yes, it was about half and half women, and which is wonderful, right? In this particular case, we had about half women and half men in the group, which was great.
But you're still experiencing
the women didn't feel like they had an equal voice.
Yeah.
So what we did is whenever one of the women would say something, somebody else, one of the rest of us, would repeat it. And so, hey, that's a really great idea. I think we could implement this X, Y, and Z. Or if somebody else then repeated that idea later and tried to take credit, actually, that was a good idea. And I remember when, somebody else said that earlier.
It was a great idea when Amy said it. Thank you.
That's right. But through doing that, we were able to really change how the meetings worked because there was more acknowledgement of what the contributions of the women were. And we also felt, more heard, supported. We and created a real friendship across the women in our group to where we would have happy hours with just the women and all these things. And we felt like that helped us have that a group that would support each other, amplify our voices, and make sure that we were all being heard.
Do you feel like if you hadn't cultivated those friendships with the other women on the leadership team, do you feel like you would have maybe moved on from that role a little sooner than you did? Because it's, it would have been frustrating, I imagine, and you would have felt like I'm not getting the traction I want to get. Let me look elsewhere for other opportunities.
Yeah, it was frustrating until that happened. So yeah, I was part of the leadership team for a while, where there weren't a lot of women in it, and there were a couple of voices who were louder than everybody else. And as a result, really, we didn't have a lot of input. And so I don't know, who can predict, right? What would have happened, but certainly I didn't feel empowered. I didn't feel like I had, really a lot of say in what was happening with the company. But also that was part of my growth path, is figuring out what my voice was at that point. I was younger in my career, and honestly, I didn't know what my voice was yet. I was still finding it.
Yeah. And it sounds like, building those relationships and friendships with the other women was a way to advocate for yourself and a way to advocate for the other women at the table. And
you guys and learn from each other.
That. Yeah. And you guys use that to your advantage, which is awesome. If there are women in tech watching this, or women in any industry, of course, watching this that are thinking to themselves, I don't actually have these kinds of friendships at work. Do you have any advice on how to go about finding those friendships at work?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways to go about it. I think the first thing is be a joiner, right? So if there is whether it's a virtual happy hour or there's a Slack channel at work for, personal type connections, game night, you have whatever all those things are, do what you can to join those, because you never know when you're going to find somebody who can be, a support for you. I would also say look into the teams and the groups that you're a part of and see if you can identify people who, again, men or women, who you think you could align with, and ask them to coffee, ask them to, go to lunch with you, just sit together if you happen to be working together in person, or, reach out to them over Slack or Teams. I will also say people love to be around people who are positive, right? And people who who will lift them up. And so if you are, definitely don't use those opportunities to complain, but instead like look for ways to support each other and to, spread more positivity. I think that really makes a huge difference when you're trying to find ways to advocate and support. You want to make sure that you're constantly leading with the positive and, not focusing on the negative.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think it is easy to slip into we're just getting together to bash the things that we're experiencing. And I think, I'd be curious to hear your perspective of your previous example of the women on the leadership team and the role you described. You guys were experiencing something very frustrating, and you could have banded together to just have happy hours or coffee chats where you just, complain, and it could get very negative very quickly. And although that was there was a problem or a challenge you guys were facing, and that maybe banded you together in a sense of camaraderie, you guys chose to tackle it rather than just complain about it. How do you make that, how do you move in that direction and not get too negative?
No, absolutely. And I think honestly, one of the things that I learned so much from those other women, and like we would preview ideas with each other, we would get
Hmm.
feedback before we would take it to the group. Like
Okay.
there were lots of things that we did to help and support each other. There were outside, just oh, she said this or whatever. Like
Right.
we really helped each other. We did a lot of brainstorming together. We, did reviewed each other's work, all of that. So as far as how to keep it positive, like we certainly had times where it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened. Like, oh, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, like, how do we take that and learn from it? How do we
Yeah.
apply what we've learned to the next experience? And I think that's like the constant learning and growth process that we all should be going through all the time. Is like, it stinks when terrible things happen to us, of course. But what did we learn
Right.
from it? How do we apply those
Yeah.
learnings in the future? And how do we make sure if we made a mistake, we don't make the same mistake twice, right? We learn from it and we do better next time.
Yeah. I think that's a really important lesson, because I think it's very easy in the workplace to, misery loves company, and it's very easy to, vent, and you build your friendships at work around venting around a common nuisance, whether it's a certain project or a certain process or a certain person that you don't, enjoy working with. I think that people find their work friends by venting. I've seen a lot of I guess memes, and stuff on social media about this concept. But you guys took a challenging situation and were able to, you know, really make it a professional development experience where you learned how to be each other's mentors and support system and advance your career. It's a pretty, powerful example of how to do that. As you've stepped into other roles since then, were you able to replicate that same sort of, friendship model?
I mean, I don't know if anything's ever the same.
Ever going
All
to
of your friends are
compare?
different, right?
Yeah.
Everything that you learn, everything you bring to the table is going to be different depending on the people. But I will say that I have absolutely tried to seek out people that I thought that I could align with and that I thought would, where we could help each other. So at another company, I was the only woman that was part of the leadership team, which was very different from, the other
Having that
experience.
50-50. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but it was really strange because there was one person who actually was a leader in the organization, but wasn't considered part of the leadership team, which I thought was really strange. So
Yeah.
I talked to my boss and I was like, hey, can we get this person added in the leadership team? Like, I think she would provide a lot of value. I think, she could balance some of the conversation. I think she would be a good addition. And she was amazing. She provided a really great, realistic perspective, I guess,
Mhm.
where we had a lot of dreamers in the group, and this person had
Mhm.
such a great ability to, kind of make it black and white and help us
Yeah.
make more data-founded
Kinda
decisions.
doing the
Um,
SWOT analysis in real time of like, here's the things we might see come up because of this. Yeah. That's
exactly
awesome.
right. And so, yeah, so I mean, in this case, like I was actually, I feel really proud that I was able to advocate and get her added to the leadership team because she provided tons of value. She was a great voice in that group, and she should have been there all along.
Yeah, that it's funny you bring up that example, because that was gonna be my next question is, as you've moved up in the ranks of leadership, how have you, paid it forward by bringing other women into the fold? And that's a great example of doing that. You know, are there ways in which you see friendship, or we've talked about this idea of mentorship being important between women who are at higher levels of leadership in a company with women who are starting out in their careers in tech?
Well, 100%. As we're like talking about this problem where women aren't getting promoted as fast as men are, like we need to do what we can. And mentorship is a huge part of that. Like having access to women who have figured out the secret formula of how to get promoted, right? Having them actually work with some of these entry level women to give them hope, give them opportunity, and give them advice about what works and how to, how to present. Like there's so much controversial things out there. Like you have to be assertive, but not too assertive because then you're aggressive. And like how do you find that balance? And there's so many examples like that of where we're constantly walking the line of trying to figure out how to present ourselves in a way that is positive and additive to leadership, but not like detracting from other people. And so I think like that's really the thing that I think mentorship can help is like, here's women who've actually, done it, right? They've made it through that first promotion step. How do we then help more women figure out that secret sauce?
Yeah, absolutely. And it just gets back to that idea of like, the more we can do this, the more we are able to, prevent that leaky pipeline to leadership roles or pipeline to CEO and keep women in it, which is, ultimately our goal in this. I know you've mentioned some ideas for in-person friendship building. How do we tackle this when many of us work fully remote and, we aren't able to grab coffee or lunch with somebody? How do we seek out friendship in a remote setting?
Well, first of all, awesome for people that get to work fully remote. I think it's such a great benefit. And especially for women, like it's true, but we have an unfair amount of extra load, right? Of needing to do the laundry or having to pick up the kids
Domestic
or whatever.
labor.
Yeah. And so having the ability to work remote is such a tremendous benefit for women. So kudos to the companies out there who are providing that ability. But yeah, I think it is more challenging, but it's not impossible, right? And so I think trying to find ways to align, setting up just one-on-one chats with people, and you can absolutely talk about work, but also talk about what's going on and get to know the people that you're working with and what's important to them, maybe outside of work as well. I know a while ago, there was kind of this leadership summit that I was participating in, and it was only for a certain level of individuals. And so I actually shared a bunch of pictures, like as just throughout the day, like, oh, here's a picture of this, here's a picture of what's going on. Shared it with one of the women that I work with. And like, I think it's just, she felt a little bit more included in what was going on. She felt like she, maybe not, she wasn't there obviously and didn't get to see all of the content and what we were doing, but did feel like she at least, kind of was a little bit part of it. And I think like it's important for us to find ways to build those bridges even when we're not together. However, if you can be together, absolutely take that time. I think even if I'm traveling on personal, for a personal trip, if I happen to be in a city where one of the team members that I work with is located, I'll, do my best to try and get together for coffee or whatever, because I think it is that in person, it is beneficial and it does help like make the relationship grow faster, I guess. Like I feel like over a video or over chat, like it takes a little bit longer, I think, to build that trust. Or I think, in person, sometimes it's a little bit quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. I have felt that being fully remote for the past almost 3 years. It just takes a little more intentional effort. And we do have a lot of virtual tools at our disposal if you aren't able to travel to be in person. I don't travel. I have a young daughter, so I have to do all of this kind of through LinkedIn, Slack, Teams, whatever that might look like, and just make a little bit of an extra effort to connect with people and ask them about their lives outside of work. My team has a good tradition.
You are such an open person. I'm sure that you like connect with people immediately. You have that way about you. You're very lucky.
Oh, thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. I try to be as approachable as possible. But I know remote I do miss, sometimes you miss that in-person connection building, but being a mom of a little one, the working remote, you cannot beat that flexibility as a benefit. Like you said, the companies that are allowing women to do that, and allowing anybody obviously, but it especially benefits women. I think, like you said, when we tend to be the heavier carriers of the domestic load, which could be a whole nother episode that we can talk about. Well, you mentioned earlier, at the very beginning of our conversation, the McKinsey study and the data that, shows this this idea that there are fewer women CEOs, and for women of color, it's even less representation. I think you said 1 in 16. Do you have any ideas of, or experiences where you've seen the importance of friendship or the value of friendship in helping, are there ways that we as women as white women can use our privilege to help, increase representation for women of color in leadership? I guess that's the question I'm trying to get at, is if you have any ideas of specifically addressing that.
I mean, 100%. And I think as individual contributors and, people who haven't made it into management yet, build those friendships and build them strong, because that's how we're going to get ahead, right? Is by women supporting each other, by, listening to what challenges are happening and helping, again, be a sounding board, be somebody, that can help provide advice and support for even people at your same level. I think it was Simon Sinek who said, like, if you're experiencing a poor culture, one thing that you can do is to create a positive culture within the small group that you work in, and creating these small microcosms of great culture, as we move on to another.
That's what you guys did in your example, your leadership team.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So create the great culture wherever you are, and then expand it when you move on. And I think that that's really critical as, for women of color, I think we need to do whatever we can to support each other. And so then when it is time to get that first promotion, you've got people advocating for you. And I mean, be loud about your advocating. Send a note to the person's boss, like, hey, I think this person's amazing. They did this really great thing today. Did you know that, like, in this meeting, this person came with, a 16-page presentation, and it was so well thought out. They had a bunch of great points. We need to be more vocal about doing that, as well as giving that positive reinforcement back to our friends, right? So, hey, I saw what you did, and that was amazing. Great work. That goes a long way to helping people feel, more confident in the work that they're doing. And that confidence is a measurable impact into their ability to get promoted.
Yeah, 1,000%. I love that idea of being a loud advocate for your friends at work and for the other people, making sure you're making sure that the people above them or above you are seeing their work. It's like, hey, you might not be on this individual contributor level. You might be missing these things. I want to make sure you know what so-and-so accomplished this week or what I saw them achieve. So I think being that advocate for other people is hugely important. Is also hugely rewarding. Will probably make you feel more connected at work by, like you said with your quote, creating that positive culture where you can, like, what is your sphere of influence to do that? I also think being a listening ear, being able to, hear people when they share their experience with you, and believing them when they share their experience with you, rather than saying, that's not my experience at work. Like, just saying, oh, I hear you. Like, I'm sorry you experienced that. Or maybe it's a positive, and saying, I'm glad you've had that experience, but just believing people when they share their experience with you. I think it's always hard to, counter your own internal reactions of like, that's not what I'm experiencing, but just to hear people out. And that is going to allow you to, be a better friend and advocate, I think.
I think that's very true. And I think women are naturally empathetic, right? And so I think a little bit maybe more open to being able to, really understand, but even if they haven't experienced it firsthand, being able to put themselves in the shoes of somebody else.
Absolutely. Well, I think this conversation has been super helpful. I hope it has left organizations with some ideas of, we've mentioned a few different kinds of broader organizational wide policies like remote work or mentorship programs that I think organizations can take away from this conversation. And then at the individual level, we've talked about how to build friendships at work, how to use that to, promote yourself and your friends in careers. And so hopefully that will resonate with folks. I think it certainly will. I think you've brought up several ideas that I will be implementing myself to create, friendship and a positive sphere of influence at work. So I appreciate you sharing your experience, Amy. I don't know if you've seen my other episodes, but I always end my episodes with a question for all of my women guests. And that is, where or when have you felt most empowered as a woman?
Well, at work, the places I felt most empowered is when I have a very supportive male boss. Because if you can find somebody who's going to be an advocate for you, and you can prove you can prove your own worth and you can do great work. But if nobody out there is noticing, then it's just lost, right? And so
Yeah.
where I felt the most empowered is where I had the strong support of somebody. And in my case, it's always been a man who's able to really advocate for me, because their voices are carry in a way that mine haven't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I realized not too long ago that I've only ever had male bosses. And I'm like, wow, it proves the statistic that you shared at the beginning. It's just like, statistically, you're more likely to have a male boss. And if that male boss can see you as a whole person and can be an advocate for you, that makes a world of difference. And then it doesn't matter as much what gender your leadership is, if they're going to advocate for you regardless. So I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. And that's been a big part of why I've tried to bring on some male ally guests onto the podcast, because they are very important and we have to have them in the workplace as well. Well, thank you, Amy, again for your time. This was a wonderful conversation. So glad you got to come on to Career Chronicles. For those of you listening and watching, please comment and add your questions. Amy and I will keep an eye on the comments to the best of our ability and respond to them as they come in. Anybody who wants to continue this conversation with me, and I'll volunteer Amy. If anybody wants to DM us, feel free to reach out and connect. But thank you guys for being here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Sloan.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.